All right, let's face it. Let's call it what it is. The president's last pick to be Secretary of Labor,
Mm.
yeah, big swing and a miss.
Mm-hmm.
That was bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember us talking about it before she was confirmed.
Oh, we went after her at Red State.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So will his second pick be any better? And then the bigger question is, why does this matter? It's a member of the cabinet. I mean, it's obviously a big deal to the policy wonks, but what does it mean to the rest of us, especially here in flyover country in St. Louis? All right, we're now joined by our friend Mark Mix from National Right to Work. You got the foundation, you got the committee, but National Right to Work. So, Mark, appreciate you being on here. Okay, so now we've got Keith Sonderling nominated to be the labor secretary. A little different look than the last labor secretary, which a lot of us, including you and me and many others, we said, President Trump, Senator Hawley, you're wrong. Well, it turns out we were correct and they were wrong, as it turns out. So what do we make of this new pick so far?
Well, Mike, it really is enjoyable to say we told you so. So you're right. We were one of the few organizations, and I remember talking to you about it explicitly about the last nominee, Lori Chavez DeRemer, who was a Republican congresswoman from Oregon who was defeated in that last election and was one of three Republicans that voted for the so-called PRO Act, which we've talked about it before, Mike, and that was a bill that first and foremost would have repealed all the right-to-work laws across the country and then added additional really significant power to organize labor, not to employees, but to organize labor. And obviously, when President Trump took the advice of Teamster President Sean O'Brien, he made a mistake. The good news is, Mike, is this time it doesn't appear that Sean O'Brien went to Mar-a-Lago and said, hey, this Keith Sonderling guy is my guy, like he did with Lori Chavez DeRemer. So Keith has been at the Department of Labor. He was in the first term with President Trump in the wage and hour division. He's been there for quite some time. He's been the assistant deputy, or been the deputy here, and he's been serving as the acting secretary since Chavez DeRemer resigned under a cloud of investigation. And he has now gotten nominated. It looks like he's going to make it through. And, Mike, why this is important is because they've got like a $10 billion discretionary budget. They've got a $54 billion overall budget with mandatory costs. And these are things that deal with independent contractors, with joint employer litigation, with, registered apprenticeship programs, things that make a difference in the lives of working people across the country. So we think it's a good pick. We came out in favor of Keith Sonderling. We have some folks that know him well here that have been with us at Right to Work. So I'm pleased about this, but we'll see how it goes. He's got to get through the Senate, and like last time, Senator Hawley was the one vote on the Senate committee that ended up being kind of a shepherd of Lori Chavez DeRemer. It's a one-vote majority for the Republicans on that committee. Sonderling had his hearing, and we'll see what happens. But there's a lot more to do here as we prepare for a new Secretary of Labor.
Good morning, Mark. This is Susie Moore. On those lines, I mean, I have to say I don't really see Hawley holding him up out of committee, but the Senate is a little different now than it was when Chavez DeRemer was going through. You've got some incumbents who are no longer going to be returning, who might be a little bit on the bitter side, who aren't all playing ball with the Trump administration. Do we get a sense about whether or not there might be some issue getting these most recent confirmations?
Well, that's some insider baseball, Susie. Well done. I think you're right. There's a few senators there that probably aren't as pleased with the president at this point as they might have been, and now, to your point, are finishing up their terms, and so it could be different. The thing about President Trump's nominees is they've been making it through. They haven't been making it through, overwhelmingly. There's been some opposition to a few of them. But I think when push comes to shove, these senators and the senators now, like Susan Collins in Maine and Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, now you got to worry about somebody like Roger Marshall from Kansas and, of course, Josh Hawley. But Josh Hawley has not opposed not one of Trump's nominees when they finally come to the Senate floor. So I think you're right. There'll be a little bit of tension there, but I think ultimately he'll probably make it through. But the dynamic is certainly different with a guy like Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, who's now he's a lame duck.
I call them the Sour Grapes Caucus.
Yeah, there you go. That's probably a better. You got to it faster than I did. So, yeah, there will be some tension, but I think it'll get done.
We're visiting with Mark Mix from National Right to Work. You can look up the committee. You can look up the foundation. We'll get to that information in just a couple of minutes. Okay, so what's different about the actual nominees? I mean, for instance, there's some argument that says, well, whoever the secretaries are, they basically do whatever the president tells them to do. It's his administration anyway, so does it really matter? They're just an administrator. But we are talking about actual policy. So what is it that makes Keith Sonderling better than the previous pick other than his entertainment and travel options?
Yeah, well, I won't go any farther than that, Mike. You did well there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Look, it is important because the bureaucracy. It's I think we got 11,000 employees there that are managed, and they're the ones that are doing the day-to-day work of making sure that, for example, there's no violations of the wage and hour regulations in the country. That the apprenticeship programs get funded and get staffed and provide the opportunity that they're inclined to provide to workers looking to train to enter the workforce. There's a lot of things there. The independent contractors, I already mentioned, it was under the Biden administration where they tried to make independent contractors employees.
Mhm.
And they promulgated regulations and rules that said, yeah, you're not going to be an independent contractor anymore. You're going to be an employee. And no surprise, Mike, that status as independent contractor did not allow unionization of that particular work or that particular person, but being an employee makes them subject to unionization. So, one of the things we have to look at and kind of the impact of this and why it matters, for example, Julie Su, who was the acting secretary under Joe Biden, she couldn't get confirmed. She's now Mondami's top advisor on economic policy. So so you see the personnel is policy. And so that's why getting the right people is important if you're going to execute not only the mission of the agency, but also what the president feels is the direction he wants to take it. And so your point about them being a cabinet member and doing what the president says is important, but giving the president guidance on the minutia of these things is very important as well, and that helps build that decision-making tree that ultimately has an impact on workers across America.
I think it was pretty obvious that Chavez DeRemer was, basically throwing a bone to Sean O'Brien.
Mhm.
But he seems to have been playing ball with this administration overall. I mean, pretty well, given the fact that there's going to be sort of diverging interests, if you will. We're not seeing like any opposition from the Teamsters or the other big union heads as far as Sonderling, are we?
Well, not really. And, Sean O'Brien, you're right. He's playing ball, but what is it? How does it manifest itself? He got honored for not endorsing anybody for president. I mean, that's kind of his prize. He's playing ball with the president because the Republicans have the House, the Republicans have the Senate, and the Republicans have the White House. I suspect, Susie, that all will change when the Democrats, if the Democrats take over the House, the Senate, or the presidency. That they will go back to what they were before, and that is really a radical organization that basically is looking out for their own. And, when you talk about the Teamsters specifically, you find out that, under the Biden administration, the taxpayers funded $94 billion to bail out private sector pension funds for the Teamsters Central States and Western States pension funds that were basically running out of money and were on critical status. I mean, he's got to play ball with the government because the government's so involved in the power and the privilege of organized labor. So what has he done for the president? I mean, he recommended Lori Chavez DeRemer. That wasn't a very good recommendation. I mean, he stayed politically out of this. He sat behind Mark Wayne Mullen when he was confirmed for the Homeland Security position, or the TSA, whatever that was, or not TSA, the Homeland Security, I guess.
Homeland Security.
But he, what has he done? He's played politics.
Mhm.
And the other union official, like Sean Fain at the United Auto Workers, he's got his head down because he's under investigation for more corruption at the UAW. The government unions, Becky Pringle at the NEA and Randy Weingarten at the AFT, they're not in at all for any of this stuff. So the big unions, the big operating unions, the SEIU, Service Employees International Union, they're on the other side still. Sean O'Brien's probably a little better politician than the rest of them, I think. I don't think he's a socialist, Marxist, democratic socialist of America, like many of the union officials in the big unions are saying, despite the fact that the rank and file workers want nothing to do with that type of ideology or philosophy. But O'Brien is, quote unquote, playing ball, I guess, by being a friend to the president.
Yeah, and once the winds of power change, which they do, at some point Josh Hawley is going to go, but I thought you were my friends. Where'd you go?
I think that's right. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. In politics, that happens about every 2 years.
Yeah, it really does. We're visiting with Mark Nix from National Right to Work. Okay, then we look at what would Keith Sonderling be advising the president on here. I mean, obviously you mentioned the gig economy type jobs, those independent contractor jobs, and this could be everything from Lyft and Uber to DoorDash and Grubhub and all of those sorts of things, which has created all sorts of opportunities for people. That, and then whatever's next for the labor force when it comes to AI, what does the Labor Department and what do workers need the government to do? Or I'll add this, Mark, not do and stay out of the way of. What is it that the next set of policies needs to do to help the workforce adapt?
Well, the latter might be the best advice, Mike. That policy directive might be the best advice for the president. But no, look, it's about, the government's gotten huge. They're involved in everything. And so if they're involved in everything, we've got to figure out, just how aggressive that involvement is. And I think the Department of Labor, to the wage and hour division, to the pension division, to the Office of Labor Management Standards, which, basically adjudicates union violence and corruption and investigates that. There's a lot of pieces to the Department of Labor that have an impact on workers. And so I think the AI thing is probably the biggest thing. And I think we're starting to see some vibrations about them putting together a task force about AI and the impact it's going to have. So I think the president would look to Sonderling and the folks at the Department of Labor to help him understand what's happening in the workplace. Trump's pretty aggressive. He's very, very active and understands a lot and has obviously very strong positions on most things. But I think in this case, with the minutia and the regulatory framework and the statutory framework, and then just the scope of the Department of Labor's involvement in things like the apprenticeship program, wage and hour, those safety, mine safety, OSHA, those types of things, they're looking for guidance on that. So that's what's important. And when you look at that, when you start, for example, Sean O'Brien would like the Department of Labor to put a thumb on, the scale and make it easier for unions to organize these workers, or, make more punishment for employers. And certainly employers that do violate the laws that currently exist need to be, need to be prosecuted and adjudicated in that way. But I think giving the president some idea about those issues, in particular the AI issue, Mike, is one that probably the president's looking for advice on, and Sonderling will have a role in that.
Mark, we just wrapped up the 2025 term for the Supreme Court, and I'm drawing a blank as to whether or not any of the big cases this year really tied into our labor, the labor aspect of things. Were there any big cases for you guys this year that really caught your attention, or that are coming up next year?
Yeah, well, the one case that was pretty interesting was the case about the FTC commissioner and the Federal Reserve commissioner. That was the, whether or not the president under Article 2 has authority. Right. We had talked about that a year ago. Mike, I think you and I talked about that a while back, about whether or not the president had the authority to remove a sitting member of the National Labor Relations Board. Biden did it in the first term. If you remember, about 20 seconds into his term on that January day, he issued an executive order firing the general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board, who had 11 months left on their term. That went to court, and obviously they said that was perfectly fine. The next question was whether or not he could fire a sitting member of an independent agency. And of course, that case mattered because the NLRB, he did remove one of the members there. It kind of stymied the NLRB's action for about a year. But now we have two nominees that have been confirmed and one that is coming up that Senator Hawley will get a chance to vote on again. That would be the third member of the National Labor Relations Board. So that was a pretty important decision. And it was something that we paid attention to because we've connected to it. I think everybody who follows government's connected to it in some way. It is a double-edged sword, though, because now the president has additional powers that says, basically you can wait these boards will be cleaned out the next time the president is elected or the new president is elected. That's a possibility. But that was a big case. But we didn't see anything that was major, Susie, to related to us. We had one case that was the final case decided on the final day of the term that we waited for that was pretty important. But nothing like that was on the docket this year for us.
All right, Mark Mix, Right to Work. Let's go ahead and give out the website information because you got two different versions that they can look at, the foundation, the committee. How do people get in touch?
Yeah, Mike, if they want questions about their rights in the workplace vis-a-vis unionization, they can go to the foundation's website, which was nrtwc.org, nrtwc.org. If there are questions about legislation, what's going on in Congress or what's going on in Jefferson City, not a whole lot's going on in Jefferson City right now, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. But we got lots of stuff going on, and they can find information there at the committee's website, which was nrtwc.org, nrtwc.org.
Yeah, or just look up National Right to Work on Google. You'll find it right there. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. All right, it's not just drones anymore. Find out what hit a commercial jet over the weekend. That's in the news dump at 6:50.